welcome back to the Winning Edge. Hello, I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle Rocket. I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues, Emily Davis and Harrison Acosta. Hello.
Heyo.
How was your holiday break? How was your winter?
It's too
Good.
cold.
Yeah, cold. Cold but
Yeah.
good.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Well, today we are back in action and we have a couple episodes left in this season. And today we're talking about sound checks. Yeah. Woo, 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 woo. We love them. We hate them. We fear them. We revere them. Um, so we just want to talk about why sound checks are important, what they are, what you should expect, especially out of varsity vocals, a competition, but just in general, something that you can plan for and account for. Why are they important, I guess, for groups to have?
I mean, I guess it's your last chance to kind of practice bits before you actually do the performance, and like especially in the space as well and on mics. So it's all like everything you've been working for coming together. Not well, almost together because it's not the actual performance, but like if you've been training with your water bottles, now's the time to switch it out for a mic, like that kind of stuff.
A lot of us at our sound checks are rehearsing the space itself. It's our first chance to actually hear what that space sounds like. And I would say, if this is not something you're thinking about, you should go ahead and bump it up to that first priority or the first or second priority. You're sound checking your sound engineer themselves, but also this is your first chance for them to rehearse your set or for them to experience your set. So for me, one of my highest priorities isn't necessarily like if my set was going to crash and burn, she was going to crash and burn anyway. Like the sound check was not going to fix that. But the sound check is going to give a chance for the engineer to get comfortable and used to, working with our set and our show and what's kind of going on there.
Right. And that engineer is working most likely with all of the groups at that competition, right? So that engineer is like pushing all the faders and blooping out the bloops. Um, well, to a certain extent, right? So I think in shows or something like less outside of competitions, your engineer is like a really important team member in understanding your set and being able to convey what you need out to the audience. But I think in a competition setting, the engineer's job really is not for balance, right?
Yeah,
Balance
not
is
not
on
creative.
right. Like balance is on the group. So
Mhm.
that is something important to remember about your engineer in this situation. How long do we get we get 15 minutes for sound checks, right?
Yeah, for
So
the
it's
for the
quick.
ICCAs. Yeah.
Yeah, and your set is 10 minutes. Well, it shouldn't be over 10 minutes, right?
Yeah. Well, if it's over
um
10 minutes, you've got some problems.
yeah. So doing the math, like, yeah, you could run your set for sure. But it probably would actually benefit you to approach it a little bit differently, right? Like we probably don't want to just from start to finish.
Yeah.
And why is it that we don't want to do that? Well, there's a couple reasons. So like why don't we, what do we want to achieve in a sound check?
I mean, like one thought off of my head, like in just related to that is anytime I stop running something, I'll be running like our set, right? We'll be running the first song. Every time I stop to correct something, I take a moment to ask the engineer if he's ready for me to keep going. And part of that is because it's not 10 minutes for me to rehearse my set. That's really, y'all should not look at it like that because it's not helpful to you and it's not helpful to your results if you spend your sound check just rehearsing your set. I would maybe if you have problem spots, maybe if you have your largest and your softest, your lowest moments, it's important to show the engineer your range, to show, the highs and the lows and what he's going to need to prepare for. If you just run your entire set once, you're giving your engineer one chance to see everything. And I'm just saying you're I always say like when it comes to competitions, take away any reason for the judges to dock you points instead of just, get rid of eliminate any mistakes. Same going into your sound check and going into competition. Remove any chance for your engineer to struggle mixing or struggle interpreting your set. Like if you have a song where your mic is literally being like passed around between 14 singers, and then you're like, oh my God, singer number 17 was not heard in her verse. It's your fault. I'm sorry. Engineer's gonna be like, good luck next time. See you next year. Like that's on you.
I was just going to follow on from that, saying that as well, be prepared for the engineer to ask for certain parts to kind of do their thing, just so they can get a gauge of what's going on. So, say if you're rehearsing like a moment in your song, the engineer might be like, "Oh, can you stop a sec? Can I just have percussion, so I can see how that sounds and master that. And that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing because then you know that you're getting the best out of your sound for that part.
Mhm. Trust your engineers.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't like them, trust them. I'm just saying, it's the one day. You're gonna go. You think two groups working together, or two groups competing one show. One hates their engineer, one loves their engineer. Who do you think is gonna have a better experience? You're not swapping your engineer the day of show. You just need to get over it. Perform the whole day. Perform like you like him.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, they are essential for sure too, especially in modern acapella. Like, I think there definitely used to be a time when I was competing way back when where it was just a couple area mics and maybe a solo mic,
Boo.
and that was sort of it. And that is really a different sound, than I think what we do today, which is like one person on a mic. The thing that I have seen that is really efficient, especially with bigger groups in Soundcheck, I would run it in order, but I would not necessarily say that you need to run the whole thing. I think you need to make sure that you're hitting your loudest points in your entire set and your quietest points. And also to sing fully, because I think that the thing that we want to do is like run choreo and like adjust to the space, which is part of your sound check for sure. But if you are only half singing and then you get to the performance and the engineer is expecting that level, it's more likelihood that things are going to go wrong and are going to be wonky, and the audience is going to maybe not have a great time if you're all of a sudden singing like 200%. So I would suggest not marking if you can help it, and actually singing when you're checking.
I think it's important to remember in that as well that the sound will be different on the external monitors than it will be on the ones that are facing you that you can hear. So if you can't hear your part, they probably can hear it in the audience because it's mixed differently. The mix isn't the same. So I know a lot of people have kind of been like, oh, I couldn't hear myself, I couldn't focus. Well, kind of like know how your part feels rather than how it sounds, so that you know, even if you can't hear yourself, you know what you're doing and how to perform accurately.
That's why personally I like to take some time walking through the audience while I'm listening or doing feedback in my sound check, but definitely good to keep in mind.
Yeah, is this a good segue to then talk about a little bit more about sound equipment itself? What do we need to know about the sound equipment itself? That's a really good point, is that what you're hearing is through the monitors, which are those speakers that are on more than likely on stage with you, right? So at downstage, they should be facing your group, and that is what you are communicating to the engineer, what you need to hear and what you don't need to hear, right? So that's your mix, but it is different. And so I'm wondering like how you approach self-mixing, or like all of a sudden you have a ton of singers that maybe have never rehearsed on wireless microphones, but like what are the first things that you're telling them on how to sing with the microphone?
I think some of that starts in rehearsal. I think it starts with making sure you know what you're listening for. Like that's part of it. Is I definitely have my members used to listening to bass, and it's not just like you should always listen to bass. Obviously, in my monitors, I typically like to ask for bass and VP, and I think voice box has kind of grown accustomed to that. Like a lot of them like listening down. And typically, especially my sopranos, I'm like, get that soprano out of that. Get them out of that monitor. I don't need her in that monitor. I can hear her 15 feet away on stage. So like my upper vocals, my middle vocals are usually kind of hollowed out of the mix a little bit, out of at least the monitor mix. They don't typically need to hear themselves to do what they're doing. They do need to hear bass for pitch and VP for rhythm, and sometimes lead for energy or lead for for power. But I think part of that comes, you can't just get to your show and suddenly like, all right, you guys know what to do for a performance. Listen, like that's you got to practice that. And so I definitely recommend practicing listening down as early on as you can. Bass has the biggest like shift when performing live versus performing on mic in terms of technique. So it's just something to think about. It's just a different environment.
Yeah, you should be planning for your sound check, if not rehearsing your sound check.
Yeah, rehearse
at the very least, like you have your list of, again, your loudest points and your quietest points in your set. And then also if you move on to the next song, let's say you go from song 1 to song 2, to have someone communicate that to the engineer, right? To be like, hey, like we're going to move on to the next set, so that engineer doesn't miss that solo later on the performance. I think we'll get a little bit further into like how we actually conduct the sound check, but I am curious when it comes to bass and VP specifically. one, how I sort of usually give the advice on how to hold microphones. Yeah. For the lower parts. And for me, if you are a VP or vocal percussionist and you've never been on mic before, that's okay. I think what you have to consider is what kind of sound do you want to produce on the microphone, because it's really going to help you amplify certain things, right? So if you want like a big bassy boomy sound, then you're probably going to want to cup the top of the microphone. I realize that I also have to still speak at this microphone. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Harrison. And then you're gonna leave a little bit of space in between too, so that the air will travel through that top part of that microphone, and it has somewhere to go. So it'll like really hit it and it really hit heavy. If it's like a light jazz kit and you don't need all that extra bass, then you can off to the side it. You can really temper it that way. So in general, the rule of thumb for me is that if you are an inner part, then you are 3 or 4 fingers away from the microphone. And if you are lead, VP, or bass, then I think you're a little bit closer. The closer you do get this microphone though to your mouth, the boomier it's going to be. Just so you know. So that's kind of my general rule of thumb.
Yeah, I like using, sometimes it's easy with the thumb, just to use the thumb physically to remember, to remind yourself. I will be mid-performance and I'll be like, oh my goodness, I'm eating the mic, or my mic is over here. Thumb's not making it. My one advice though for basses, there's a lot of different sounds between nose, neck, mouth, side of mouth, like cupped mouth. Experiment. Because I think it's gonna be based off of your anatomy and based off of your timbre and range. But I think all bassists need to decide when you're going to be felt and when you're going to be heard. Like when are your notes going to be heard for pitch, and when do they need to be felt for impact? And I think that impact is where I've seen my basses the most be like, all right, you want to feel me? Okay. You know what I mean? Like that's where mic technique kind of comes into play. But I think that's going to be different per person. So you, as a bass, you just need to take some time and play with this to figure out, how do I sound the boomiest when I need to be that.
I'm curious for basses on y'all's opinions on an octave. So if for those of you who don't know, an octave is now pretty typical to be added to a bass microphone, which means anything that bass sings an octave below or sometimes 2 below will parallel it, right? So it's like a way for us to get a lower, kind of more modern digital sound. And it adds a sort of like presence to the music itself.
I like it depending on the
Octave, yeah.
song. Like if it's softer, like a soft ballad, and you don't need it, like don't use it for the sake of using it. But if you think it adds something to your set, then I think put it on. Why not? It sounds cool.
Yeah. I would like to see more of it when it's appropriate. I think it adds a color, it adds a depth, but the extra octave adds more opportunity for contrast. So do with that what you will. I think there's been a weird reputation for octave use. So I mean, similar to like people's weird obsession with autotune. Like, I hear autotune. I've suddenly have my doctorate in this and can talk about this. But that's kind of how I feel. I feel like octave has had a lot of bad rep based on ensembles using it. But I think in terms of impact, it's crazy powerful. Like if you could bring out a tuba in the last chorus of your song, would you? Yeah. Like any color, you can misuse it. You can exhaust the ear of the listener by having too much sub octave. But that's like if we're talking like a treble group who starts out of without that octave, that gives a lot of range. That's an even higher, higher high that can drop into an even lower low.
My opinion is that the octave is like the reverb for singers, like is the same for bass and low end. Is again, yeah, it can be overused in a way to feel secure about a big sound. But if you're not producing that big sound, then I think it can really interfere with the set, actually, especially if you're not rehearsing with an octave. So I would use it mindfully, and I do think that if you have time, that's something that you should test kitchen in the sound check. And I think you can even go as far as saying like, how much of that do you want mixed in? You know what I mean? Like 1, do you want it on? And 2, how much do you want it mixed in? And I think that kind of leads us to how we want to conduct sound checks in general. But I think you can have a person out in the audience to hear both options and make a decision at that point if you want it on or off. Bass is a little trickier because it can start to interfere with the the pitch and the tonality and being able and can the group hear the center of the pitch? Because the more like low end that you introduce into it, I think the harder it is for your bass to really actually nail and hear
those
if they're
pitches.
in or out. And so
Yeah.
that's a foundational thing to your sound that you probably don't really want to fuck with like on a hard level. But I like
Yeah.
a little to a medium, you know, like a little to medium dressing on my salad, you
Honestly,
know.
if you hadn't if
Little
you hadn't
sprinkle.
thought about it prior to that sound check, I would probably not just add it, you know?
I do want to make one more point, which is that these microphones, whether they're wireless or whatever, they tend to be really directional. So if you start to like just creep off your microphone and it's not, you'll probably notice pretty quickly. And so wherever your mouth is pointed, you want your microphone to follow. Like it's really like an attachment to that. I just wanted to make
Mhm.
that little point before we move
Totally.
forward.
On the point of that, though, 'cause you just reminded me, small pet peeve. I personally do not like when everyone is walking around off, like it's not my part, I'm not singing, and you're still walking around like this. Like I'm not into that. I don't mind if
Like a little
you could
robot.
rest your mic on your shoulder, whatever is kind of appropriate to your I'm like, I'm saying that. I know every engineer everywhere just cringed. They were like, please God, no. Be aware where you're pointing this. Do not point at any monitor. Be professional. But being professional is holding it in a way that's comfortable and appropriate for your energy, your stage presence.
Any chance you can for clarity in what moment you're trying to create is going to benefit you no matter what. The more busyness, the more whatever, anything that I've seen before, I'll just immediately forget. So the audience is smart when it comes to connecting the dots, but you have to be clear on what those dots are.
Mic drop, I think.
Yeah, throw that mic. Yeah,
That's when the engineers really cringe. They're like, no.
yeah. They're like, shut this off.
Dollars
Okay.
Yeah,
sound
yeah.
right.
The engineer's like, that's my grandmother's microphone.
Thank you though.
That was a family heirloom, that
Yeah.
SM58. Okay.
He's like, but I loved your song. I love that Coldplay song so much. Thank you.
Susie, no. Okay. We're bringing back a
Oh,
lot
poor
of inside
Susie.
jokes. Poor Susie. She's probably a soprano too.
Get her off the stage. Susie's
Okay,
done.
she's a senior. She'll
Benched.
have her moment and then she'll move on.
Or will she move on?
So, in addition to planning what it is that you're going to sing at Soundcheck, is there anything else that the groups can do ahead of time before they even get to Soundcheck? For me, the big one is rehearsal markings. Like I can't tell you how
Right.
much time is wasted when you're like, where are we starting? From which part? The second chorus of what? Like know where you're starting from and where you're ending.
Yeah,
I
or your
think that's
song
kind of fun.
form. Even just knowing your verse, chorus, blah blah blah. Besides for you, like this is not a greater picture for everywhere, for anything, for everything. Know your song form and your rehearsal like letters, because that just helps rehearsal. But also for your engineer, nothing is more frustrating than being like, we're gonna start on bar 67, and your engineer is like, what? He's like, okay, cool. It's like,
Yeah, you're gonna be giving your engineer at the very least who your soloists are. Plan for the fact that the engineer is only seeing your set for the first time at Soundcheck. And so it's not really fair to expect the engineer to be able to navigate 8 different solos in the span of 4 bars. And then later being like, well, the engineer, it's like, well, I think
yeah,
you have to understand scope. Like you have to understand what it is that you are
yeah,
here to do
yeah.
and how much time you have to do it. It's not a lot.
He is not the reason you lost. He is. I'm
Mhm.
sorry. He is never gonna be the reason you lost. I'm gonna say your mic shut off. IRL. Mic shut off. That happens.
Mm.
That happened
What's your
once to
plan?
me.
That's why I said before, like, be nice to your engineer. Even if you don't like him, you're just trying to get as much of a positive out of this one day, this collaboration. You're collaborating with your engineer. They're a part of your show now. They're not the wait staff. I'm just saying, like, they're actively collaborating on your show. You need to give them as much leeway to like help. You know what I mean?
The overwhelming majority, a lot of them are people who have been in acapella for a long time, who really care about these events,
Hmm.
who just want groups to sort of succeed. Like there are definitely some there are definitely some interesting characters in the scene, but yeah, like knowing that your relationship with the engineer, even as short as it may be, even if it's just for that day, is really crucial to also like your level of professionalism, for you to be able to have someone who communicates to the sound engineer and acknowledges that they have a job to do and that you have to communicate what you need. And not to just like ignore them. I guess I've seen a lot of groups just kind of go on and like do their
Yeah,
thing
like
and like not talk to the engineer and not be like, "Hi, nice to meet you." Like they just like have have a lot of respect for this profession that is really
mhm.
important. It's not a make
Yeah.
or like
Mm.
it's really
Good luck
important.
doing your show without him. Like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
truly.
It's like letting a stranger throw your wedding. And it's like this big event, it's this thing you've been looking forward to, but like you have to be very communicative and almost like intimate with this person very quickly. You're like, all right,
Yeah. I was like,
let's go.
he's throwing it. He's gonna throw
This
it
is
no
the
matter
set
how
we
you
have been
feel.
crafting for months and months and months. We've been watching every episode of The Winning Edge, and we've been taking their tips and tricks, and now it's time. So, yeah, it's a really and it's exciting. Like a lot of times, a lot of groups will just be really nervous. I think that's something that you should account for too.
Hmm. Like bad sound checks is a thing. That's also normal. You have to accept a bad sound check because it's still information. Like it
Mm.
might be a bad sound check because it was so boomy. Maybe you're A, sound check one. Maybe you're A, performing into an empty house, which you are, which is why it's more boomy, why it's extra reverb, why the sound's not quite right. Just things you have to account for those bumps that are gonna happen. And if you don't know they're gonna happen, you need to get with somebody with some experience and ask them about some of the bumps. Or watch this show.
Yeah, like nine out of 10 times, if you have a bad sound check, the performance is going to be like on point. It's just the acapella curse. It's how it works.
It's the acapella superstition that I have no idea if I believe or not. Like, is that it's like when it's again back to the wedding metaphor. It's like, oh, it's good luck when it rains on your wedding. It's like, I think you're just trying to make that person feel
I'm
better that
like,
it's
please stop.
raining on their wedding day. Like they're like, oh, it's good luck. You're like, I don't okay. I mean, yeah, I'll take it.
Fair.
I'll take it. Something you can do before you get to sound check is during rehearsal, determine and identify what the glue of that song is. Like, what is the thing that your group really needs to hear in that moment? Is it the hi-hats of the vocal
Right.
percussion? Is it the root of that is in another part? Like,
Yeah, like a motor.
understand, yeah, like what is the motor? Like what is really essential for the group in that moment? And likely it's probably going to be BP bass and lead, but just know those beforehand so that you can ask and make sure that you can hear those. Okay, cool. So we we sort of talked about what it means before the sound check, things that they can prepare. So let's talk about when they actually get to the sound check and you have that 15 minutes. What should be in place, or like what should we should talk about what it's like to actually be in that 15 minutes. So you should hopefully have a plan. What else?
Group
I think,
silence.
yeah, I was
Sorry.
exactly about to say that.
I was like,
Wow,
but
what a
like
what a good way to what a
friendly
good way to
silence.
display what we're doing. We're like have one person represent one person
No,
talk
no,
at
no.
a time.
Talk over each other. There, y'all need a rep. I've also will say like I've had like a member rep. I've had usually a main person to be the point of communication, but I want my group to feel empowered to be like, I have one comment, or I'm nervous about this thing, like so that if they need, or if it's something they're not sure that needs to be answered now, which comes with that prior communication. If something pops up you don't think it needs to be answered now, can you remember it or can you write it down so we can discuss it after sound check? Because one of the higher priorities is our time together that we're sharing, that we don't want to cut into because we're talking and talking over each other.
Do
I
y'all
mean,
have
there's more.
people? Yeah. Do you have people go out in the audience? I think this one's this. We had a director, so that was like it was already defaulted, and that it was really helpful to have somebody out in the audience. Do y'all send members out there during sound check?
Not typically members, but I will say like you need it depends on the situation. Like if I this is so specific, but like if for example, I had a member who was not feeling it. And like in the sound check, but like I could tell they were trying to overcome it, whether it was the sound, they're overwhelmed, maybe it was their first time. That might, I don't know. I feel like there's an opportunity there for them to take a minute to go out. And that's this like something I think about. When something bad happens, we need to pivot because we need to remove that energy or we need to move away from that energy. And so I find this is just an opportunity for someone to kind of experience the set and maybe at a pivotal moment that helps them connect with the set in the moment. typically I'm standing in to give some feedback, some notes, whether that may be, hey, so and so, your belt is it's really cutting. It's like really cutting. I would maybe say, for since you know how to self mix a little bit, I would pull away from the mic a hair on that particular point. You know what I mean? Using based on our experience. But I like what the experience can be of either myself listening for a second, sending someone else to listen for a second. For the same reason, I'll make one more point that I don't typically pull my choreographer, who is sometimes me, but my artistic director, whoever's done visuals, I don't normally pull them out of the ensemble to watch. I normally have them in like performing with everybody, usually displaying what needs to be done, kind of thing. But I've taken the time to have them just perform it facing the group again, like kind of like a rehearsal, but I've had them at the front. Just if that's in the case of like energy's not there yet, we need something now to show them, to have them feel it. I'll be like, Sammy, come to the front. I need you to double backflip, do this choreo, vogue the house down, please, girl. I need you to get them to see and feel it.
Oh, I just get really stressed in sound checks, to be honest.
Great.
Totally the other end of the spectrum there. but but I do usually do the same as you, like have just one person at the front, like musical director or something, like assessing the sound and the blend. And then we were really lucky that our bass had perfect pitch as well. So we would just turn to him and be like, any problems? Can you hear anything that's really wrong?
Any
And he'd be
problems?
like, yes or no, or be like, everyone is off by everything. But yeah, and then we'd just have choreographer just come and like set like starting positions and like positions, like key positions.
Yeah.
And that's
Especially
pretty
in
much
relation to the stage, I forget about that. Like, proportionately, sometimes it's just different.
Yeah, there would be like one splodge on the floor, and then she'd be like, "This is your splodge. This is where you stand. Like
Your
this spot has your
splodge.
name on it. Like like some like dirt. Like that is your marker. Like, I don't care if someone else moves it. That is your marker." So that was kind of what we were working with. But yes, those key people really. And then if you had a problem, it would be like raise your hand. Don't just like call out. It's like you're in
Yeah,
school.
yeah,
Raise your hand.
for sure.
Keep it organized.
I love splodge as an official measurement of anything, of
Or like
everything.
crease in the floor where it's like kind of bunched up a bit or something like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's another thing that you can do during sound check. Even if you're not running full choreo, you can mark together where center stage is, and to make sure that your stage pictures are
Yeah,
even
yeah.
and balanced. And at the very least, you should know how far you're going to be from those monitors. So if you do
Right.
have choreo where you have people all the way in the back and pretty far, just make sure that you can hear during those
Yeah, yeah.
parts. Yeah, and remember, it's gonna sound different on stage when people are in the room. So during sound check, it's most likely gonna be empty, and you're gonna hear a lot of pinginess and kind of like
Verb.
openness, and it does feel good, especially like in the sound check. But it will tend to get a lot drier when you're on stage, and because there are a bunch of bodies in the audience soaking up all that house sound. So maybe just be prepared for that, so that you're not totally shocked by the by the time you get there. And also to ask for, even if you don't know all of the language of to be able to communicate to the engineer, you can still talk to them in your own terms. Like you can use descriptive language, like it sounds muddy or like unclear here, it sounds boomy, it sounds shrill. Like those descriptive words will help the engineer help you troubleshoot if you're having a difficult time with the monitors. So that's just something to keep in
Yeah.
mind. Like, yeah, it's all about communication. It's all about, like, are you making the same thing? That's it.
Yeah.
Like 15 minutes to figure out, like, are you all on the same page? Great.
Soundcheck is a great time to exercise patience. Anytime you're mentoring something to your engineer, it is going to take them an appropriate amount of time to make that happen. But on top of that, you're 2 minutes into your sound check, you are running your first song, and you're like, I can't hear mezzo one, mezzo two, alto one, tenor three, and baritone four. You know what I mean? And your engineer's like, that's because they're not on yet. The board has got 40
Give me a
switches on it.
chance. Yeah.
I'm on switch number 6, girl. I'm just saying exercise patience because like it's in both all of your best interests, and it's a waste of time when you're sitting there waiting. Not just waiting, sometimes you need to wait, but like if you're sitting there giving the same instruction that your professional musician engineer has already received and is acting on, I'm just saying, if you haven't thought about it, take an extra moment in the middle of your sound check, be like, oh right, patience, just in case, patience.
Yeah. And at the very end, feel free to ask the engineer, like, what do you need? Do you need anything else? Do you need to hear anything? Do you need to hear a
Yeah,
specific
yeah,
person?
good question.
it doesn't hurt to just talk directly to them and into the microphone also if you have a
Oh yeah,
microphone.
always into the
Yeah.
microphone. People are always like, can we run? Can we run the? You know what I mean? They always pull the mic away just to talk to the engineer, like he's 40 feet away from you. Just curious. My groups always had, and maybe I don't know when we started this. We had these like little checkpoints, we used to call them, like parts in the song. Sometimes it's even between songs, but I've also had them like an iconic like big moment in the song where we know that this part lands, and every time we get there, I'm like, it's like hitting lap two. Like I'm like, okay, great, we made it past the first chunk. This is another point for me. Like I know we're back on our turf. Let's go again. But I think checkpoints are really good, especially if you have a long set or a really intense set, and you have 4 minutes of like that 4 minutes of really hard part of the set. Like somewhere in there should be a checkpoint. Put someplace for you guys to be like, okay, we're making it through.
Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of The Winning Edge.
Like and subscribe for more notifications about our next episodes.
Yeah, join us next time for our season finale.
Oh,